All righty, and we are back with our opening keynote. Hello, everyone. So Liat and Sydney here from Hyro. We're thrilled to be your session host throughout the day. Thanks for joining us.
Feel free to type any of your questions in the chat, which we'll be moderating throughout the session.
And our speakers today are Ed Marx, a very close friend. Love everything you do, Ed, in the healthcare space, CEO at Marx Advisory, and Chris Ross, of course, CIO of Mayo Clinic. They'll share their personal journeys from both sides of the health system and discuss their upcoming book release.
And before we forget, 5 lucky attendees will receive a co-signed copy of the book. So keep your fingers crossed. Ed, the mic is yours.
All right. Well, thank you for having us. We're super thrilled. Chris is actually sitting right next to me. So if I look over there, yeah, he's right there. So if I'm looking over there, you'll know why, because we're just like have the eye contact thing going. But we're super thrilled. It's a topic near and dear to both of us. So let's kick this thing off because we're all about digital front doors for sure. Unfortunately, we became super users of digital front doors. We knew about digital front doors. Obviously, as CIOs, our organizations have digital front doors, but we never realized, right, Chris, how important they were until certain things happened to both of us.
Life-saving, Ed. Absolutely life-saving.
So we had some tough times, and we won't go deep into it because I think a lot of people already know, but we had some super tough times. Heart attack, cancer, all sorts of different things that occurred along the way that made us become super users of the products that we were sort of responsible for. So it's a little bit ironic, but we realized, dang, how important it was for healthcare organizations to get the digital front door right, because it is a lifesaver. It is like we talk about our book, a hand that you can hold in your journey. So thankful for digital front doors and everything that people do to create them and make them more easy to navigate and improve experiences and those sort of things. So as we get into it, we'll sort of tell you about this book that came about as a result of this journey and how that leads us towards the digital front door as well. Right, Chris?
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that we want to talk a lot about, and I'm sure that this will resonate with many of you, is a digital front door. If you have a shiny front door to a restaurant and you walk in the restaurant and the host is a jerk and can't get you a table and the kitchen is a mess and maybe doesn't follow health inspection, it doesn't matter what beautiful digital front door you've got. And in fact, to create an effective digital front door, you really do need to deal with the back of house issues that are the gnarly kinds of things that CIOs and clinical leaders deal with every day.
Yeah. So this book we keep referring to, and as Liat mentioned, there's some for you, and they're very rare to find this book. It's hard to see, I know, because of my background.
Here, I'll hold it up.
Yeah, it'll be easier for you. Yeah.
Here we go.
So this book came about diagnosed because of the journey we went through, and we realized, my gosh, if it's so tough for those of us inside of healthcare to go through and have a good patient experience, imagine what it's like for those who have no one. That's why the digital front door becomes so critical to the healing process. And so we were inspired to write this book, and we have to give credit to Mayo Clinic Press and our editor, Nina, senior editor, who sort of took us a different direction with the book and basically said, there's been a lot written about patient experience within healthcare. What about writing the book for consumers, right? People who don't have anyone like ourselves. So that's what that book is. So it's called Diagnosed, a hand you can hold through your healthcare journey. And it's really intended for those, the majority of the population who have no one to help them through. That's an insider to help them through their journey. And when we created that book and took a lot of effort and doing a lot of interviews and doing a lot of focus groups, we were able to assimilate from many of you who are watching right now, learning from you, sort of best practices for patient experience. But it didn't belong in a book for the public. So we created a second booklet, what we call a booklet or white paper, and Chris has it right there. And Liat will drop in the notes in the chat, she'll drop how you can order these books. So this one is 5 things you can do to enhance the patient experience. And one of them has to do with digital front door. And so we're going to get to that. We're going to save that part to the end. We're going to kind of cover all 5 of the areas because we think will be helpful to you. And then sort of talk about the digital front door. And as Chris already alluded to, sort of the back end services around that. So we're going to jump right into that. But before we get there, Chris, can you talk about the royalties?
Yeah, so I know we're sounding like we're here promoting a book, and I guess we are because we hope it'll be useful. But all the proceeds that Ed and I would receive from this book are going to fund at Mayo Clinic for cancer research. So if we're out here schlepping the book, it's not because we're trying to get rich. It's because we'd like to be helpful to those who need it, and we hope the books will be helpful. But the proceeds will go to Mayo Clinic cancer research.
Yep. So the net of what we're about to say, if I could summarize it in one sentence, is experience is never the reason for a patient's positive or negative clinical outcome, but can be the accelerator of either. So the experience is super important we get it right. And that's why we created this white paper / booklet with these 5 things that you can do. And we're going to jump right into it and talk about each one. And we'll end with sort of the digital front door. So the first one, and I give all credit to Chris on this, he's expert at this, and that's really about enterprise services over departmental products. Chris, can you expand a little bit on that?
So I don't know about you all, but when I was going through my medical care and when I hear about problems in my system, it's because a department says, well, we do it this way. And an example could be, we had a big struggle when we did our electronic health record implementation. Do we optimize ordering for the ordering physician or for the lab that's receiving the order, right? So the real question is sort of who wins? And what we were balancing was we wanted to make it so that clinicians didn't have to go through a monster long list of orders, but we also wanted to make sure that what they ordered was exactly the right thing and that the orders were well specified. So we had to think about this from an enterprise perspective. And where we landed was we kept our catalog of all the tests with all the specificity, but we worked really hard to customize and personalize order sets for each individual physician and to help them to become educated about next available treatments and so on, next available tests. Another example would be how do we move patients within our environment? So surgical departments need to have a way to get patients into a rehabilitation, recovery environment, and then we need to discharge them to home. You know what kind of problems we run into of discontinuity for patients, where patients have to stay an extra day in the hospital because we didn't get our discharge part right, because the pharmacy has rules about MedRec and nursing has rules around release instructions intended to avoid readmission, blah, blah, blah. Everybody's got their thing. And you know what? Every individual thing has a purpose. We designed them to be safe, to be efficient, to save money. But when you put them all together, you suddenly get these hidden glass walls that you run into, either as someone who's managing a health system, like Ed and I have, or if you're in the position of a patient where, gosh, why can't I have something? And how many times as a patient have you run into a situation where someone says, well, you can't have that because we don't do it that way. Why don't you do it that way? Well, it's because of some rule. So, we really looked at enterprise kind of approaches as a way of thinking about how to do this in a more rational way.
Yeah, Chris, right when I was learning this from you, my dad was going through a rather complex health situation. And I remember helping him. I went out, we would take turns, all of my brothers and sisters, we'd go and spend a few days, each one of us at a time, with him and getting him to post-acute care and a great health system. And so this happens anywhere, whether it's a small health system or a big health system, small hospital, rural, academic, it happens everywhere. And so he was getting some complex care, and this aftercare, it would take like a whole half day, because he was still in a wheelchair. And so he had to be put in a specialized type of van and all the rigmarole around that and going through a big city. It would take literally a half day for one appointment. So they were scheduling him, and like on Tuesday morning, he would go to this building for an appointment, and then they'd have him come back the next day to come back to that same building. So I got involved, and I was like, called the friends there, and I was like, can we not just figure out the way to do it all in the same day since he's there already? It's that sort of thing. So it really helps if you can streamline those sort of services for the patient and have this very fluid experience. So the next one is empower patients and foster resilience. And here, Chris, I got to hear you speak very recently, and you talked about resiliency as a superpower. Can you delve into that a little bit more?
Sure. So when we did our research for this book, when we were thinking about what do we want to see to providers, we were looking for things where patient experience might be correlated with better outcomes, as Ed says, and the correlation is pretty weak. But the place that where there is strong correlation is the patients who are more resilient are the ones who do better. They've got more ability to endure more treatment, to bounce back, to do rehabilitation, other ways. And frankly, resilience is a superpower that a person can just use in life generally. Bad stuff happens your direction. Where does it come? And what we discovered was resilience is a skill that can be taught. And there's lots of resources around, what to do in this area. And you can go out and Google, resilience tools, or I'll put a shout out. Mayo Clinic's got a nice thing. If you just do Mayo Clinic resilience, you'll get to the right page. But it's things like take a hopeful attitude, make every day count, foster relationships with others, try and find meaning in what you're doing. And everybody's going to find that little edge that they can pull back and find resilience. For me, it was something I learned from someone else, a dear friend. I mentioned this in the book, whose daughter had leukemia twice. And she would talk about the gift of cancer. And I thought, this is insane. What do you mean? And her view was, and I've come to learn that this is not an uncommon view, that you don't have a chance to choose whether you're going to get a difficult diagnosis or not. But all you can do is to manage, your response to it. And her response was to find what's the thing that cancer is going to teach me that I didn't know before.
Yeah.
So when I went into my first episode of cancer, it was I was going to live with joy, and the second was I had cancer right after we implemented our EHR implementation. It was like 6 weeks after we went live. I started treatment. So I thought, I'm going to be a better CIO. I'm going to look at this from the patient's viewpoint, and I'm going to try and take something out of this. It'll make me better at my job. So that was my sources of resilience.
Yeah.
There's a little hacks that I did along the way, like tried to model what, my best in my family, and the way that people behaved. And I thought about the way my grandparents treated other people, and I brought that into the game.
Yeah.
But, everybody's got a hack,
No, that's good stuff. And it really makes a difference. And the other thing to enable is the concept of shared decision-making. So do whatever you can. So I know we're talking to mostly digital leaders and tech leaders. So do what you can to help enable that with the free flow of information to your patients. And if you give them more information available in the portal, if you empower the patient, then clearly they're going to do better in their experience because they're going to be part of it. So some of you so we just finished the second one, which was second key learning, empower patients and foster resilience. And some of you may be thinking, well, that's great, but what does that have to do with me as a digital leader or tech leader? The fact is you're a leader of your organization. And so you can make a difference in all these areas because you're not just a tech leader, a digital leader. If you are, a director, a vice president for sure, a CIO, a CDO, absolutely, you're a leader across the spectrum. And it's part of our role to see these gaps that we've been talking about and help fix them. And we can leverage technology to do a lot of that. And the next thing I say as we tee up this third thing is
I'm going to shoot that one in your direction.
Okay.
When you get there, go ahead.
Yeah, these things are free, except when we get to the fifth one we're going to talk about. The things we're talking about are mostly free. All right, Chris.
All right. And number 3 is create and sustain an empathetic organization and culture. You're the king of this. I'm just the student on this issue.
Well, I learn from other people and just, we borrow from one another's wisdom and bring those things to our own organization. So I think it's really, really critical if you want to deliver a great experience to your patients that, again, you've got to lead by example. And there's so many things to unpack here. And that's why we really encourage you, again, not a commercial, but man, that booklet that Chris is going to put back in the mirror again, that you can download and there'll be a link. It's full of great examples of things you can do. So we only have time to highlight a couple, and I have so many that I could share with you. That's how important this is, and all the different things that you can do. Certainly, one thing that you can do is training. So I believe empathy is mostly caught, not taught, but I am absolutely all about education as well. So work with your team, whoever in your organization. Some of you will have a patient experience organization, some won't. It doesn't matter if you don't. You probably have some sort of OBUDS person that works with the patient community or has focus groups, things like that. But get involved and have them give some training. And if not, and again, there's not a plug for the Cleveland Clinic, but there's a video out there. If you type in Cleveland Clinic empathy, that video alone will do a lot for people in terms of trying to waken up within them sort of this thing about empathy. And so there's a lot of different things you could do. And as a leader, you should lead by example. So when you're out visiting, when you're rounding, you can bring other people with you. Don't do things alone. If you have family members of some of your team that might be sick that are okay with you visiting, bring someone with you and just see the patient. So the more that you can do to see the patient, the better, which kind of bleeds in. They're separate, but it kind of bleeds into the fourth thing, which I'll give some more practical examples that you can do. But that's around creating a patient-centric culture. So I'll give you one example. Chris may have another example, and might give you a third example because this is so important. And again,
this is number 4.
Yeah, this is number 4.
Patient-centric culture.
Yes. So it kind of bleeds very similar to empathetic, but it's different. So there's, again, so many things you can do and want to be super practical for you and your investment of time right now. But one thing is that all of your town hall meetings or whenever you convene a large group of individuals, while it's great for you to speak and you need to speak as a leader and things like that, let them hear from a patient. So bring in a patient as a guest. I started off all my meetings like that. We would bring a patient. And so patients are very willing to share. And so we would always look for a patient who had some experience that was related to tech. And they would come in, and I'm telling you, almost every time it left everyone crying. And that wasn't the intent, but it also goes back to the empathy. It's like, wow, what I do matters. You mean that patient portal that we have, it actually helped improve their experience because now they were empowered because they could get to their results real time, not wait for some filtering that takes place, but they could get real time, and that helps them with shared decision making. Hearing the stories directly from the patient is super key. So that's one. I'm going to punt over to Chris. I'll come back and finish number 4 with maybe another example for things that you can do.
So I've really learned a lot from Ed in this respect. And so I've started to use patient stories as part of my meetings too, but I'll give the kind of more intellectual version to go with the emotional version. The more intellectual one is Mayo has this principal value of the needs of the patient come first, which sounds like a slogan, and it can be. And I was shocked when I arrived at Mayo that in fact it's real. And we use that question often when we are blocked someplace to address that issue. So I remember when I first started at Mayo, we had a cyber incident that we needed to respond to. And there was some dispute in the room. And there was a mix of people from junior to senior, some clinical, some technical, and we just needed to find our way through this problem. And we were blocked, and people were beginning to sort of get heated and argue with each other. And one of the 2 leaders stopped and said, okay, stop. We're going to go around the room, and everybody's going to talk about what they think we should do from the standpoint of what's the need of the patient in this particular instance. And it was this great sort of thing that stopped the heat in the room and turned us into more vision. And by the time we got around the room and everybody had a chance, nobody interrupted, nobody argued like, no, but you're wrong. Everybody had a chance to talk. By the time we came around to the end, when people rooted what we were doing in the needs of the patient, it became really clear what the answer was. And by the end, it wasn't controversial anymore. So it's head and heart, I think, would be the way to describe it. And I think both matter. Yeah,
no, that's beautiful. That's what's fun about Chris and I, because we have a slightly different, same heart, slightly different approaches, which is great because there's not one size fits all. So it's awesome. That's why it was so fun doing the book together as well. So you get multiple perspectives. One last really easy example that's free is I talked about rounding already. I touched on rounding. Like you should round all the time, and you should have your leadership round with you on a routine basis. You need to see patients all the time. You need to be in the corridors of your facilities where the care takes place, because it touches the heart, and it has intellectual meaning as well too, because you'll see things that you hadn't seen before. So a practical thing is I would make everyone in IT spend a day with a clinician. And I'll just tell you one quick story where everyone has to write about it. So we have like a SharePoint, you do your thing. You can pick any hospital you want. You can attend any type of service you want. This particular person was a database administrator. He shadowed a nurse at one of the hospitals for a whole shift. And he said, Mr. Marx, this was his write-up. Mr. Marx, I was really upset about this program because I have a backlog of requests that I'm trying to catch up on, and just take away a whole day of productivity. I thought, my gosh, what a waste of time. He said, I've been a database administrator here for 25 years, and I never knew we had patients. Of course, he knew here that he had patients, but he didn't know here. And that's the job as leaders, connect them. And that's helps with the patient experience. Because then he saw for the first time, he said, he became the best database administrator we had. That's how I'll end that particular story. So there's so many things you can do, but you have to be intentional. You have to create these programs. You have to take action. It's not okay just to talk about it. That has limited effect. But if you talk and take action, that's when transformation happens. So those are some easy hacks or tricks and tips.
So Ed, you love this, but I got to say, we got 14 minutes.
Yeah, we got to keep moving.
Should we do the last one?
Yeah, let's see. You're really good at this. So this is really about digitizing the organization and supporting transformation.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of where I began to a large degree. I love digital front doors, but you need to have the processes that extend all the way into the organization. So, I think about the example in our environment. We provide online appointments for simple things like primary care visit or a mammography, other kinds of things like that. But it's really hard to do an online appointment for things like chemotherapy or dialysis or surgery. So in order to create an environment that feels like an airline or your favorite hotel or a banking experience, and bringing that to healthcare is tough if we don't change the stuff in the back room. And some of it is going to be very resistant to change. It's going to mean things like synchronizing your clinician scheduling system with your patient scheduling system. And boy, do we struggle with that.
Yeah.
We've got in my organization a lot of really complex itineraries, so it's hard. They're interlinked, but you got to do it. Making your decision about in alignment with the regulatory standards on release of records. How are you going to do that? How are you going to present data in your environment? And then increasingly, people are going to want to have intelligent tools. They're going to want to chat with their portal. So I think portals and apps are really cool, but they also are beginning to feel so 2010.
Yeah.
People are going to want to have an intelligent, machine-enabled conversation with the organizations in which they trust. That's the future. And maybe, people don't believe that. Maybe they think it's hype, but I think increasingly it's true. Think about what you're doing when you do searches nowadays, regardless of the environment you're in. So we as technology leaders are going to need to take on the challenge to drive deep into our organization the kind of process redesign and process synchronization and enterprise over department thinking that's possible for us to create a digital front door. And even more important, a digital back door, because our patients don't like being sort of thrown out the back door when their treatment is done. They want support and they deserve it. And so do their caregivers and others. So.
Yeah, Chris, the only other thing I would add is make sure you have the right people also, the right partner, obviously key for digital front door. Yeah. And then internally, the right people helping make the decision. And so I'm always a huge advocate of having a patient directly involved in terms of the digital front door and helping you with future design and what else would enhance the experience. And make sure that the other people, the internal people, are individuals that sort of represent the patient also, but make sure you have some people that are very futuristic and cutting edge thinking, to Chris's point, that'll challenge even you. So, because we all know as leaders, we don't know everything and we need to be challenged ourselves. So I always loved having at least one person on there that was like way out there, sort of pushing the bounds a little bit. And I'd be like, at first I'll be really defensive, but then I know, I probably need this person. Yeah. Help me think for the future. All right. So I think that wraps up the 5 things that we wrote about in the booklet that we learned from many of you. And so if we had to make a couple concluding sentences, and then we'll have time for questions.
Yeah, let's go to Sydney and Leah as
All right.
soon as we can.
Yeah, let's go. We're ready then. If we got questions, let's take them.
Great. So hi, folks. I'm intrigued. I'm listening, but we do have a lot of other people's questions, so I'll put mine on hold. So we had one from Kara here. What advice do you have for an organization that is resistant to change to adopt these amazing approaches? We hear this a lot. So whichever one of you.
You actually, I heard you speak about this morning.
I think I did. Change management. I'm a really big believer in some of the old school, like Phil Cotter, change management approaches. Things like find a burning platform. Like, if we don't do these things, then this bad thing will happen. And it can't be fake, it needs to be real. The second is building a coalition for change. How do you find like-minded people who want to do the right thing and are willing to lean in and to help push forward in lots of ways? It's finding what are the points of resistance to change and overcoming them as much as possible. So honestly, I think to a large degree, it's all about change management and finding the way to create a vision, to be future oriented, to be hopeful, to be positive, to acknowledge risks along the way, but not to allow them to paralyze you. I highly, endorse these 30-year-old ideas from Cotter about how to do change. He has like 7 principles of change, and they all make sense.
Yeah.
Leah, it looks like she's coming back.
Yes, we're flooded with questions, so I was choosing the best one. Sorry about that. I guess I'll choose the question about your book, so you could speak to it. Does the book address challenges surrounding diseases that are underdiagnosed or have a lengthy diagnosis timeline? For example, average 10 years until an endometriosis diagnosis. These can be extremely frustrating for patients beyond the health implications. And I'll stay on so that there's no lag for me to come back.
No worries. So our book, we'll go to less of the kind of booklet and more into the book itself. In the book, I think there's a couple of key things we recommend. One is, and this is speaking to patients, number one, own your journey in whatever flavor you want, participate in getting to help. That's absolutely critical for someone who's on a medical odyssey. The second is, have a village of people around you to support you. Again, same thing. Many times people who have a long duration illness, they're going to need caregivers for a long duration. And to get there without burning out your caregiver, you got to have support of various kinds. And then the third, which is probably most relevant to this, is please, we encourage people to make your decisions about where you're going to get care and understand the power of second opinions as appropriate. A lot of times you have a GP, they say, you've got a potential problem. Here's a specialist you should go see. Well, that referral is great, and you should take it really seriously, and your GP probably knows. But you know what? If you're not happy with the team that you're engaged with, change the team. Don't keep banging along with the same sort of thing. And there's a two-sided sword to this. One is change your team and try something else, and the second is patients can lose traction if they keep jumping from caregiver to caregiver. So we don't want to be trivial about it. But if you really feel like you're in a dead end and you're not getting the attention you need, you're not getting the focus you need, you're not getting the care you need, change your team. And a lot of times that will make a huge difference. I know Ed and I both worked in environments that were kind of the ending spot for a lot of medical odysseys and people who had been banging around from place to place for a long time. And part of the reason why people, kind of like places like Mayo and Cleveland is like, I finally found someone who listened to me and took care of my concern. And I'm not doing a commercial for Mayo or Cleveland, but sometimes things are complicated and you do want to be in an academic medical center. You do want to get to a deep specialist. You don't need it for everything, but sometimes you do. And that means sometimes a little bit of struggle, maybe some travel, but it's worth it, for a couple of weeks of hassle to avoid the kind of 10-year journey that our questioner is talking about.
Can you tell us a little more about this white paper that I'm pushing out one more time mainly for CIOs? What can they get out of this? What's in there for them?
Yeah, again, there's 5 global practices we found through all these focus groups, and I should have mentioned that earlier. Both the book Diagnosed, we realize that we have a specific perspective given our backgrounds and our zip code, that sort of thing. So We interviewed a lot of different individuals to make sure that book spoke to every population that we could think of. And it's the same with the booklet, the white paper on patient experience. These ideas came from leaders of FQHCs, small rural hospitals, as well as large academic medical centers, and with a little bit of a global perspective. So you'll learn these 5 things that anyone can apply. 4 of the 5, as we mentioned, are free. So we highly encourage it. And again, it's full of details. So I mentioned, and Chris mentioned, a couple of the sort of hacks or tips and tricks. So you'll learn all those things inside that booklet.
And we wanted to do a distilled view. We didn't want to write the giant book and the giant workbook and the giant checklist. So the book Diagnosed, you can read in a long evening. The white paper, How to Improve the Patient Experience, you can read over a lunch hour. We didn't want to write giant books. We wanted to get stuff that people could get some distilled viewpoints.
Yeah.
It means that we don't explain some things in great depth and we don't cover absolutely every single corner. But we felt like something that, if you've been diagnosed with a difficult disease, you don't want to take a book that's going to take you a week to read. You want some great ideas you can pick up in an evening. And as a CIO, we hope that the, booklet is something that you can read over a lunch hour. What's a lunch hour? I don't like that anymore. You can read it on your commute, on the train, on the way into work.
Yeah, and the one thing that should be freeing to people is it does not require a chief patient experience officer. It does not require an office of patient experience. Now, if you have them, great. Not saying anything bad about them, but we're just also saying you don't have to have them. Some of the best examples that we learned through this process were organizations that did not have official office or official title. It really is everyone, I believe, the personal opinion here, it's really everyone's obligation to be a patient experience officer and to lead the way within our organizations.
I wish I could frame your quotes in little picture frames, because really you guys nailed it with the wisdom here. So at this,
You got to buy the book.
And Leon, as you tee up the next question, I know we still have 2 minutes. Something Chris was talking about with the change, and the question is so important because that's the thing everyone struggles with. We hit these walls, and Cotter is a great model that people can pick up. I've used that a lot. The other thing is, if you're a leader, if you're a director or above, you are a leader in your organization. Even if you're a manager, you're also a leader. But especially at the director level and above, you just got to lead it. Do not let a policy or procedure or history get in the way. And Chris gave some good ways in the Cotter example on how to create that initiative to make change. But sometimes you just got to lead it. You're a leader, so just do it.
well, I want to thank you too at this point for being amazing leaders in the space, and healthcare is very lucky to have you too. I mean it. Thank you so much for joining us today. At this time, we have about a 2-minute break for folks. Oh, you guys are in the same room. I love how your eye contact was just that was great. And there was no echo, so you worked that perfectly. I know you two personally. I see you. I love that. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Ed, for leading change in healthcare and mainly just improving patient access, which is what's most important. Stick around if you can, Ed and Chris, for the sessions coming up. Our next session is the CIO's Guide to Responsible AI, Strategies to Overcoming Barriers and Building Trust. Not less important. So thank you, you two. And if there's any other questions, no, I see that everyone is thanking you and sending you hearts. So at this time, we'll see you soon.
See you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.